Stop! You can't cut that power line!
Stop!
Karen Pemberton looks up at me from the utility shed, bolt cutters already biting into the wire. "Watch me," she says, and snap. My grandfather's electricity dies at 2 a.m. His oxygen machine goes silent 20 feet away. The backup battery starts its death countdown, 20 minutes before a Korean War veteran suffocates in his own bed. She dusts off her manicured hands, grinning like she just won the lottery. Medical equipment doesn't belong in residential neighborhoods. Maybe next time you'll pay your landscaping fines on time. $47. That's what my grandfather's life is worth to our HOA president. But that smug little smile of hers, it wouldn't last long. Because Karen had no idea she just picked a fight with someone who plays by very different rules. What would you do if someone tried to murder your grandfather? Drop a comment below, because what happened next will blow your mind. Let me tell you how we got here. My name's Roman Delacroix, and I've been an electrical contractor in Phoenix for 12 years. Former Air Force, learned my trade rewiring fighter jets before I came home to take care of the most important person in my life, my grandfather Ezra. Ezra raised me after my parents died in a car crash when I was 8. This man is everything to me. Korean War veteran, Purple Heart recipient, the kind of guy who still stands for the national anthem, even though his knees crack like breaking branches. 3 weeks ago, he was in the ICU at Phoenix VA Medical Center fighting pneumonia complications. Touch and go for 6 days. The doctors said his lungs were so scarred, he'd need supplemental oxygen at home indefinitely. So I bought this house in Willowbrook Heights, specifically for him. Single-story ranch in a community of 47 homes, established in 2019 around a central park. Annual HOA dues of $890 cover landscaping, streetlights, and that fancy community gazebo nobody uses. I converted the master bedroom into what the respiratory therapist called a home recovery suite. Essentially, a mini ICU with hospital-grade oxygen concentrator, backup tanks, monitoring equipment. Everything Medicare approved, everything keeping a war hero alive. The smell of medical-grade plastic tubing mixed with Ezra's Old Spice cologne became our new normal. The gentle hum of his oxygen concentrator, running 16 hours a day, became the soundtrack of our quiet recovery. I worked early electrical jobs so I could be home by noon, helping with his physical therapy, making sure his life support stayed running. For 6 months, everything was peaceful under Mrs. Sterling, our beloved HOA president. She was a retired nurse who actually understood medical equipment and ran things with common sense. Then, Mrs. Sterling moved to assisted living, and the neighborhood elected Karen Pemberton on her property values protection platform. Big mistake. Karen's 52, divorced, lives alone in the biggest corner lot house overlooking the community park. Former middle management at some insurance company, the kind of woman who treats every conversation like a performance review. She's got this severe bob haircut that looks like it was cut with a ruler, always carrying that tablet, documenting violations like she's building federal cases. Her first target? My drought-resistant landscaping. I'd planted desert willow and palo verde trees, native Arizona species that survive desert heat without constant irrigation. Beautiful, practical, environmentally responsible. Karen issued me a $47 fine for non-approved plant varieties. According to her interpretation of the covenant, I should have planted Bradford pear trees, a species that dies in Phoenix heat and wastes thousands of gallons annually. The crunch of gravel under her sensible shoes as she marched around my property, measuring distances with an actual tape measure. When I tried reasoning with her, she cut me off. The covenant specifies approved landscaping. Environmental concerns are not my department. Week 2 brought a $93 violation for excessive vehicle noise. My work truck's diesel engine starting at 5 a.m. allegedly disturbed the neighborhood peace. Never mind that I'd been leaving for work at the same time for 6 months, or that Mrs. Patterson's lawn crew starts their equipment at dawn. Week 3 escalated to a $187 fine for commercial vehicle loitering. Ezra's monthly oxygen delivery truck takes 30 minutes to deliver tanks and check his equipment. Standard procedure for homebound ICU recovery patients. Karen documented this as unauthorized commercial activity, but week 4 crossed into pure evil territory. I caught Karen photographing Ezra through his bedroom window while he napped, his oxygen cannula clearly visible in her camera flash. The metallic click of her shutter mixing with the steady rhythm of his life support machine. The desert wind carried her overpowering perfume as I confronted her in the driveway. "Medical equipment creates noise violations," she said, checking items off her tablet. "The HOA covenant prohibits home-based medical facilities." "Ma'am, that's my grandfather. He's a veteran who needs that machine to breathe." Her smile was Arctic ice. "This is a residential neighborhood, not a hospital. These people need to learn there are proper facilities for medical care." That's when I realized Karen's systematic plan. Document everything medical, escalate fines until we couldn't afford to stay, force out the veteran and his inappropriate life support equipment. She had no idea she just declared war on someone who knows exactly how to cut her power. Karen called an emergency HOA board meeting for the following Thursday. The email she sent to all 47 residents had the subject line, "Urgent. Zoning violation threatens neighborhood safety." She'd attached a 12-page slideshow titled, "Unauthorized Medical Facility Documentation." I couldn't believe what I was reading. This woman had turned my grandfather's recovery room into some kind of criminal enterprise. Photos of his oxygen concentrator labeled as industrial equipment storage. Pictures of his backup tanks marked hazardous material accumulation. Even shots of the medical supply delivery truck with arrows pointing to commercial vehicle violations. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the community center. I spent the entire day researching, remembering a case I'd read about when we first moved in. Something about a disabled veteran in Texas who'd fought his HOA over wheelchair ramp restrictions. The case was called Giebler versus M&B Associates, and it established that federal disability law always trumps local HOA covenants when it comes to medical necessity. That gave me hope as I printed out guidelines, building my defense. Walking into that fluorescent-lit conference room felt like entering enemy territory. The burnt coffee smell mixed with Karen's aggressive hand sanitizer use, and the sound of folding chairs scraping against linoleum as 12 residents settled in for what felt more like a trial than a neighborhood meeting. Karen had stacked the deck perfectly. 3 board members who'd already pledged support for her Property Standards Initiative, plus a nervous-looking guy named Bradley from the city zoning office who kept checking his phone like he had somewhere better to be. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a serious zoning violation that threatens our property values and neighborhood character," Karen announced, clicking through her slideshow with the confidence of a prosecutor. Each slide was more absurd than the last. My grandfather's medical equipment, photographed from every angle like evidence at a crime scene. Mrs. Patterson, a retired nurse who lives 3 houses down, raised her hand. "Karen, that's just a home oxygen concentrator. My husband used one after his stroke. They're quieter than most dishwashers." Karen's smile never wavered. "Mrs. Patterson, I appreciate your emotional investment, but we must follow legal guidelines, not feelings." That's when I stood up with my printed federal guidelines. "Ma'am, with respect, you're completely wrong about the law. The Fair Housing Act requires reasonable accommodations for disabilities. This is established case law going back decades." The room went quiet. Karen's confident expression flickered. "Mr. Delacroix, federal guidelines don't override local HOA covenants," she said. But I caught Bradley from zoning shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "Well, actually," Bradley interrupted, "federal disability law does supersede local." "Thank you, Bradley," Karen cut him off sharply. "The board will make decisions based on our covenant interpretation." During Karen's bathroom break, Mrs. Patterson leaned over with information that made my blood run cold. "She's been showing your house to potential buyers," she whispered, "telling them the neighborhood is transitioning to senior care and property values are dropping because of all the medical equipment." The pieces clicked together like a puzzle solving itself. This wasn't about noise violations or zoning compliance. Karen was running an elaborate real estate manipulation scheme. Target elderly residents with medical equipment, create hostile environment through harassment, force them to sell below market value. I remembered Mrs. Sterling's sudden move to assisted living right after Karen's election. Mr. Kowalski getting violations for prescription deliveries. She wasn't just targeting my family. She was systematically cleansing the neighborhood of senior citizens. The formal vote felt like watching democracy get hijacked. Karen's motion. All medical equipment must be relocated to interior rooms not visible from public areas. External medical deliveries limited to 1 per month with advance HOA approval. The texture of those federal housing law printouts felt rough under my sweating palms, as neighbors debated whether my grandfather deserved to breathe freely in his own home. The sound of pencils scratching on paper as votes were cast. The smell of fear and bureaucracy mixing in that sterile conference room. 4 votes for Karen's restrictions, 3 against. My grandfather's medical rights just got voted down by people who were terrified of property values dropping. As residents filed out, Karen approached me with that same predatory smile. "Mr. Delacroix, I understand this is emotional for you, but rules exist for everyone's benefit. I'm sure you can find appropriate senior living facilities that specialize in medical care." The rage building in my chest felt like molten steel. This woman had just weaponized democracy against my dying grandfather, turned our neighbors into accomplices in her elder abuse profiteering scheme. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice steady, "you just made a very expensive mistake. Because while Karen was playing political games with my family's life, I was already planning something that would expose her real estate scam and turn her perfect little kingdom into a federal civil rights battleground." She had no idea that attacking a veteran's medical equipment had just triggered protections that would make her HOA rules look like toilet paper. Karen wasted no time implementing her compliance inspection schedule. Monday morning, 7 a.m. sharp, she showed up at my door with a toolkit that would make a building inspector jealous. Measuring tape, digital decibel meter, professional camera, and that damn tablet for documentation. "Mr. Delacroix, this is your official monthly compliance inspection," she announced, waving a laminated card like FBI credentials. "The board voted to ensure all medical equipment meets residential standards." I watched her circle my house like a vulture, measuring distances from Ezra's oxygen concentrator to property lines. The morning desert air carried the sound of her heels clicking on concrete and the metallic snap of her measuring tape retracting. She spent 45 minutes documenting decibel levels outside his bedroom window. The concentrator hummed at 45 decibels, quieter than most dishwashers, but she wrote readings like she'd discovered a rocket engine. By Wednesday, the first post-compliance violation arrived. $93 fine for medical waste accumulation. Her evidence? 3 empty oxygen canisters by my garage, waiting for monthly pickup by the medical supply company. I'd seen this exact setup at dozens of homes during my electrical work. It's standard procedure for any patient on supplemental oxygen. That's when I realized I needed to start fighting back with technology. My electrician buddy Jake helped me install security cameras around the property perimeter. 4 units with night vision, motion detection, cloud backup. If Karen wanted to play surveillance games with my family's safety, I'd record every second of her harassment. The cameras paid off Thursday night. Motion alerts pinged my phone at 11 p.m. Karen creeping around my backyard with measuring tape and flashlight, documenting window dimensions while my grandfather slept 20 feet away. The infrared footage showed her clearly trespassing, building her case against the dying veteran's medical equipment. Friday morning, I filed a police report. Officer Martinez listened politely, but delivered the expected news. "Sounds like a civil matter, sir. HOA disputes rarely involve criminal charges unless there's property damage." Karen's administrative warfare escalated throughout the week. Violations for excessive medical delivery frequency. Citations for residential appearance violations because oxygen equipment was visible through front windows. Fines jumping exponentially. $47, $93, $187, $374. Sunday afternoon brought the breakthrough I needed. My neighbor Jake stopped by with intelligence that changed everything. "Marcus, you're not going to believe this," he said, lowering his voice. "My buddy works at Pinnacle Properties downtown. You know, those billboards everywhere? They've been asking about properties in this neighborhood, specifically about houses with senior resident transition opportunities." The mini twist hit like lightning. What does that mean? Corporate speak for pushing out elderly residents and flipping their houses to younger families. My buddy said they specialize in community demographic transitions. They make money when seniors sell below market value. Everything clicked. Karen wasn't just harassing residents with medical equipment. She was creating documentation to justify property devaluations for her real estate partners. Document enough medical facility violations, and family homes suddenly looked like unlicensed nursing facilities. That evening, I drove to Sunset Meadows Assisted Living to find Mrs. Sterling. What she told me confirmed my worst suspicions. "Oh, Marcus, I'm so sorry you're dealing with Karen too," she said, her weathered hands shaking. She did the exact same thing in my previous neighborhood. The Garcias, the Kowalskis, the Hendersons. All elderly couples with medical equipment. Karen would document everything as facility violations until families couldn't afford the escalating fines. Mrs. Sterling showed me photos of her husband's home dialysis setup. She tried to force us to relocate his kidney machine to the basement, said the equipment sounds violated noise ordinances. When we couldn't physically comply, the fines kept escalating. We had to sell for $30,000 below market value, just to escape. The pattern was crystal clear. Karen was a professional predator, systematically targeting vulnerable seniors through weaponized HOA enforcement. And Pinnacle Properties was profiting every time a frightened family sold under duress. But as I drove home through the desert night, breathing in the scent of cooling asphalt and blooming Palo Verde trees, I realized Karen had made one fatal miscalculation. She'd chosen to target a veteran's life support equipment, which triggered federal disability protections that made her cute little HOA games look like children's rules. I had security footage of her trespassing, witness statements documenting her harassment pattern, evidence of systematic discrimination against disabled residents, and most importantly, I had the legal knowledge to turn her predatory scheme into a federal civil rights case that would destroy everything she'd built. Karen thought she was hunting another helpless senior citizen. She had no idea she'd just walked into a trap set by someone who understood exactly how to use the law as a weapon. The smell of desert sage mixed with diesel exhaust from late-night truckers on the distant highway. Tomorrow, I'd start building the case that would end Karen's reign of terror permanently. Karen's next move crossed every line I thought existed. Tuesday morning, a certified letter arrived that made my hands shake. Emergency electrical hazard violation. Immediate utility disconnection required. According to her official documentation, my grandfather's oxygen concentrator created unacceptable fire hazards due to electrical overload. She'd scheduled an emergency utility inspection for Thursday at 10 a.m., conveniently when I'd be 40 miles away on a commercial job I couldn't reschedule. The letter cited some obscure covenant about emergency authority to disconnect utilities during safety violations. I'd never seen this clause before, but Karen had convinced two terrified board members to sign off on cutting power to protect neighborhood safety. I remembered reading about a case years ago when I was fighting the VA for Ezra's benefits. A disabled veteran in California whose landlord tried similar tactics. The federal courts ruled that intentional utility disconnection for medical equipment violated disability protection laws so severely that it carried the same penalties as physical assault. That gave me hope, but I needed immediate solutions, not legal precedents. Thursday morning at 2 a.m., while I was 30 miles away fixing emergency hospital lighting, my worst nightmare exploded across my phone screen. Ezra's panicked voice. "Marcus, the power's out. The machine stopped working. The battery says 18 minutes. I broke every speed limit racing home through empty desert highways, arriving to find Karen and two board members still standing in the utility shed like they'd just finished a home improvement project. They'd used bolt cutters to sever the electrical connection to my house specifically, leaving every neighbor's power running normally. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, finding my grandfather struggling in the darkness, his backup battery countdown ticking towards 0. Karen looked up from the severed wires with satisfaction radiating from her face like heat from summer asphalt. "Emergency electrical hazard requires immediate disconnection, Mr. Delacroix. Medical emergencies should be handled at appropriate facilities, not residential neighborhoods." The rage that hit me could have lit up half of Phoenix. This woman was using HOA rules as murder weapons against my dying grandfather. But as I frantically reconnected wires, neighbors started emerging in bathrobes and slippers. Mrs. Patterson arrived first, the retired nurse who immediately checked Ezra's vitals and confirmed my fears. Dangerously low oxygen saturation. "Call 911 now," she ordered, her professional voice cutting through Karen's protests about proper procedures. "This man needs emergency medical support." Mr. Kowalski appeared with his phone recording everything. "Karen, what the hell? You can't cut power to medical equipment. Are you trying to kill him?" Within 15 minutes, our quiet suburban street transformed into an emergency scene. Ambulance lights painting red and blue across beige stucco walls. Paramedics manually ventilating my grandfather, while I restored electrical connections. The smell of diesel exhaust, mixing with desert night air, and the metallic scent of cut electrical wires. Karen stood over those utility controls like some suburban dictator, explaining to increasingly furious neighbors why cutting power to a veteran's life support was necessary for community safety standards. But the game-changing moment came from Mr. Kowalski. While paramedics worked on Ezra, he pulled me aside with news that made my heart race. "Marcus, I've been recording her harassment for weeks," he whispered, showing me his phone. "Yesterday I caught audio of Karen coaching the board members. Make sure the power cut looks accidental. We can't have documentation of intentional medical equipment sabotage." The mini twist that changed everything. Karen's own recorded words proving premeditated criminal conspiracy. This wasn't bureaucratic harassment anymore. It was documented evidence of planned assault against a disabled veteran. EMT Supervisor Rodriguez, a weathered guy who'd clearly seen everything, pulled me aside as they loaded Ezra for hospital observation. "Sir, intentional sabotage of life support equipment is federal assault. I'm required to report this to authorities." He handed me a card for the FBI Phoenix field office. Then he turned to Karen with the kind of voice that makes criminals confess. "Ma'am, you just committed a felony against a disabled veteran. I suggest you contact a lawyer immediately." As the ambulance disappeared beyond our community gates, red lights fading into the desert darkness, I stood surrounded by the aftermath of Karen's attempted murder. The acrid smell of burned electrical insulation, the sound of neighbors whispering angrily about what they'd witnessed, the texture of that FBI business card between my trembling fingers. Karen had just escalated from petty harassment to federal crime, but in her arrogance, she'd made one fatal error: committing attempted murder with audio evidence, multiple witnesses, and a victim protected by federal disability laws. While she stood in that utility shed dusting off her hands like she'd accomplished something heroic, I was already planning her complete destruction. Because when someone tries to kill your grandfather over landscaping violations, you don't just file complaints, you make sure they never hurt another human being again. While gathering Ezra's medical records for the FBI report, my hands were still shaking from last night's adrenaline, when I discovered something that made my heart race for entirely different reasons. Buried in our house purchase paperwork was the original 1987 property deed, and hidden in the legal jargon was a clause that would obliterate Karen's entire operation. Emergency medical equipment easement. This property maintains perpetual utility priority for life-sustaining medical devices, superseding all future homeowner association restrictions or municipal ordinances. The musty smell of old paperwork mixed with my morning coffee as I read those words 3 times, hardly believing what I was seeing. The original developer had anticipated an aging community and built federal medical protection directly into our property deed. Karen hadn't just violated HOA rules, she'd trampled on a legally protected easement that made her covenants look like toilet paper. But the real revelation came when I started digging through public records using my contractor license database access. The sound of my printer working overtime as I pulled document after document, each one more damning than the last. Karen's corner lot house carried a $47,000 lien from a previous lawsuit. Disability discrimination charges from Sunset Meadows, her former neighborhood. The court documents read like a horror story. 3 elderly families suing her for systematic medical equipment harassment. The Garcias, forced to sell after she demanded they relocate dialysis equipment to the basement. The Hendersons, driven out when she classified oxygen concentrators as commercial facilities. Federal court had ruled Karen engaged in pattern discrimination against disabled residents, ordering $75,000 in damages. But here's where my blood started boiling. She'd only paid $28,000 before declaring bankruptcy and fleeing to our community to restart her predatory scheme. The families she'd destroyed were still trying to collect their court-ordered compensation. The smoking gun came through my electrician buddy's real estate connections. Corporate filings showed Karen wasn't just some power-hungry HOA president. She was a paid consultant for Pinnacle Properties, earning $5,000 referral fees for every house that sold below market value due to her manufactured quality-of-life concerns. The scam was diabolically simple. Target vulnerable seniors with medical equipment, escalate harassment until families couldn't afford the legal fights. Then Pinnacle swooped in with below-market offers that looked like salvation to desperate elderly residents. 3 houses in our neighborhood had fallen to this scheme in 8 months. Mrs. Sterling's place, Mr. Rodriguez's home after his wife's stroke, the house next to the Kowalskis after Karen targeted their son's epilepsy monitoring equipment. All sold to Pinnacle subsidiaries for 15 to 20% below market value. But staring at that original easement clause, breathing in the scent of victory mixed with desert morning air streaming through my kitchen window, I realized Karen had made one catastrophic error. That medical easement didn't just protect my grandfather's equipment, it gave me legal authority to demand emergency medical infrastructure to prevent future threats to his life support. An emergency medical infrastructure could include anything necessary to ensure uninterrupted power supply, including industrial-grade backup generators requiring emergency vehicle access and priority parking on public streets. The beautiful irony crashed over me like a wave. Karen's illegal power cut had triggered federal protections that would let me bring equipment into her pristine neighborhood that would turn her suburban paradise into an industrial nightmare. I spent the afternoon researching hospital-grade generator rentals, 50-kilowatt diesel monsters requiring 53-foot trucks for transport, creating enough noise to wake half of Phoenix. Units federally protected as medical emergency infrastructure that could legally park wherever medical necessity demanded. Karen thought cutting my grandfather's power was her checkmate move. She had no idea she'd just given me legal authority to park industrial equipment outside her front door for as long as I deemed necessary to protect a veteran's life. The next morning, I called Premier Medical Equipment Rentals with the confidence of someone who just discovered he held all the winning cards. I need your largest hospital-grade backup generator for a veteran's medical emergency situation, I told the dispatcher. Something that can power an entire ICU ward. Sir, our Caterpillar XQ50 is what hospitals use during disasters, she replied. 50 kilowatts, hospital-grade power conditioning, requires a 53-foot truck for transport. It's designed for life support priority situations. Perfect. How soon can you deliver it? We can have it to you by Thursday, but you'll need emergency vehicle permits for residential street parking. Already covered under federal medical easement protections, I interrupted, savoring every word. This is protected medical infrastructure. While that beautiful piece of machinery was being scheduled, I started building my coalition. Mrs. Patterson was my first recruit, the retired nurse who'd witnessed Karen's attempt to kill my grandfather. When I explained the legal situation over coffee in her kitchen, the smell of her famous cinnamon rolls mixing with righteous indignation, she was immediately on board. Marcus, that woman has been terrorizing this neighborhood for months, she said, her voice steady with professional authority. My husband's wheelchair ramp got a violation notice last week. Mr. Kowalski's prescription delivery van was cited for excessive medical traffic. She's systematically targeting anyone with disabilities or medical needs. Next, I visited Mr. Kowalski, whose security footage had become my evidence goldmine. His living room was a command center of surveillance monitors, recording equipment, and printed documentation of Karen's harassment campaigns. The electronic hum of hard drives and the clicking of keyboards as he pulled up weeks of recorded harassment. I've got everything, he said, scrolling through files. Audio of her coaching board members to make violations look accidental. Video of her trespassing on 6 different properties to photograph medical equipment. Phone conversations where she discusses property value manipulation with someone from Pinnacle Properties. But the most valuable recruit was Mrs. Garcia from Sunset Meadows. When I called her, explaining that Karen was running the same scam she'd escaped from, her voice went quiet for a long moment. Marcus, "That woman destroyed my husband's final years," she finally said. "He died 6 months after we had to sell our house because of her harassment. The stress, the legal fees, the constant fear. It killed his spirit first, then his body. If there's anything I can do to stop her from hurting other families." Mrs. Garcia agreed to testify about Karen's pattern of disability discrimination. More importantly, she connected me with the other Sunset Meadows families who were still fighting to collect their court-ordered damages from Karen's previous lawsuit. I spent Tuesday evening with my VA disability rights attorney, Sarah Martinez, mapping out the federal case strategy. The smell of legal documents and black coffee filled her downtown office as we built what she called an airtight civil rights violation case. "Marcus, you've got everything we need," Sarah said, spreading evidence across her conference table. "Pattern discrimination, documented conspiracy, federal easement violations, attempted medical equipment sabotage. Karen's looking at $100,000 in federal fines plus criminal charges." The legal strategy was simple but devastating. File federal civil rights complaints with HUD, while simultaneously requesting emergency restraining orders against HOA utility access. But the psychological component would be even more effective. Wednesday night, I organized what I called the Willowbrook Medical Rights Coalition, a neighborhood meeting disguised as a potluck dinner. 18 residents showed up, and as we shared food and stories around my dining room table, the pattern of Karen's abuse became undeniable. The Pattersons, harassed for wheelchair accessibility modifications. The Hendersons, cited for their daughter's asthma nebulizer being too loud. The Rodriguezes, fined for medical equipment visibility through windows. Every family with medical needs had been targeted. I distributed laminated cards with emergency contact numbers: FBI, Domestic Crimes Unit, HUD, Civil Rights Hotline, local disability rights advocates. We created an encrypted group text for real-time coordination and assigned specific documentation roles to each family. But the centerpiece of my plan was pure psychological warfare. Thursday morning, that 53-foot generator truck would arrive during Karen's usual inspection rounds. The timing was perfect. She'd be walking around with her clipboard and measuring tape when a diesel monster the size of a city bus rumbled into her pristine suburban paradise. The technical specifications were beautiful. The generator required emergency vehicle clearance, which meant Karen couldn't legally demand its removal. It needed 24-hour access to public streets for medical emergency response. The diesel engine would create a constant 75-decibel industrial soundtrack to her quiet neighborhood. And the best part? Under federal medical equipment protections, it could stay as long as my grandfather's medical condition required backup power protection. Karen thought she'd won by cutting our electricity. She had no idea she'd just given me legal justification to turn her suburban kingdom into a construction zone, complete with industrial equipment that would make her life a living hell while protecting every vulnerable resident she'd targeted. Karen's desperation became obvious by Friday morning, when she scheduled an emergency health department inspection, claiming my grandfather's medical equipment created unsanitary residential conditions. The email she sent to all residents had attachments showing photos of oxygen tanks, labeled as medical waste storage, and our home labeled as an unlicensed healthcare facility. But her real panic showed when she started bribing board members with promises they'd never see property values drop if they helped her resolve the medical facility situation permanently. Mrs. Patterson overheard Karen offering to pay Jim Bradley's HOA dues for the year if he'd support immediate medical equipment relocation requirements. The neighborhood Facebook group became Karen's propaganda warfare zone. Anonymous posts appeared hourly, all following the same script. Photos of oxygen tanks labeled as industrial gas hazards, claims about property value impacts from medical facilities, and fear-mongering about our community becoming senior housing instead of family neighborhood. My security cameras caught her spreading poison door to door Wednesday evening. The infrared footage showed Karen visiting houses with printed packets, spending 15 minutes with each family, gesturing toward my house while delivering what neighbors later described as safety presentations about medical equipment dangers. 3 families reported Karen's pitch was identical. These people are turning residential homes into medical facilities. Your property values will plummet if we don't stop this immediately. Do you want to live next to a nursing home? But Karen's most desperate move came Thursday morning, when she arranged a surprise health department inspection with a compliant official who arrived with pre-written violation notices, clearly scripted by Karen herself. Inspector Williams walked through my house like he was following a treasure map, documenting oxygen concentrator noise violations and medical supply storage sanitation concerns. When I produced my federal disability accommodation paperwork, his confidence evaporated faster than desert rain. "Sir, these appear to be legitimate medical accommodations," he stammered, backing toward my front door like I'd shown him a live grenade. "Inspector Williams," I said calmly, "I have video footage of the HOA president coordinating this inspection to harass a disabled veteran. Are you aware that federal law prohibits discrimination against medical equipment users?" He practically sprinted to his car, leaving behind his unused violation forms and Karen's detailed inspection guidelines. That afternoon brought intelligence that confirmed my suspicions about Karen's financial desperation. My electrician buddy Jake discovered through county records that Karen's house was entering foreclosure proceedings. The bankruptcy from her previous disability discrimination lawsuit had caught up with her, and she needed Pinnacle Properties referral fees to avoid losing everything. The bank foreclosure notice had been accidentally delivered to my address due to similar house numbers, giving me documentation of Karen's timeline. She had 60 days to make $18,000 in back payments or lose her house. Each family she successfully harassed out of the neighborhood meant $5,000 in Pinnacle referral fees. My grandfather's medical equipment wasn't just threatening her control, it was threatening her financial survival. But the mini twist that changed everything came from Mrs. Patterson's nursing connections. She'd called former colleagues at Phoenix General, asking about Karen's claims regarding medical facility regulations. What she discovered made my blood boil. "Marcus, I talked to the head of respiratory therapy at the hospital," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice tight with anger. "Karen called them last week, claiming to be from residential safety enforcement, and asking for documentation about home oxygen equipment being dangerous in residential settings. The hospital had refused to provide any such documentation because it was complete nonsense. Home oxygen concentrators are specifically designed for residential use and carry the same safety ratings as household appliances. Karen had been trying to manufacture official-looking medical expert opinions to support her harassment campaign. She's not just breaking HOA rules," Mrs. Patterson continued. "She's impersonating authority figures to obtain false documentation. That's fraud." Thursday evening brought the community pressure I'd been building toward. 18 neighbors attended an impromptu neighborhood safety meeting that Karen had called to address medical equipment concerns. But instead of supporting her narrative, families started sharing their own stories of harassment. The Hendersons described Karen's demands that they relocate their daughter's asthma equipment to non-visible areas. The Kowalskis revealed Karen's attempts to limit their son's seizure monitoring deliveries. Mr. Rodriguez shared audio recordings of Karen threatening escalating fines if his wife's wheelchair modifications weren't made less obvious. As Karen stood before increasingly hostile neighbors, trying to justify her systematic targeting of disabled residents, I realized her support base had evaporated. Even the board members who'd initially supported her property standards initiative were backing away from what had clearly become criminal harassment. But the most beautiful moment came when Mrs. Garcia arrived from Sunset Meadows, carrying a folder of court documents from Karen's previous conviction for disability discrimination. The sound of papers rustling as she spread evidence across the community center table. The smell of fear sweat as Karen realized her past had caught up with her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Garcia announced, "this woman was convicted of the exact same harassment in her previous neighborhood. She's a professional predator who targets vulnerable elderly residents." Karen's final, desperate gambit came Sunday morning with an emergency HOA board meeting email marked "Urgent, immediate resolution required." She'd scheduled it for Monday at 7 p.m., claiming authority to condemn residential properties for health and safety violations, and demanding immediate removal of all medical equipment or face complete utility disconnection. The email included a 48-hour ultimatum. My grandfather's life support equipment had to be relocated to appropriate medical facilities, or she would exercise emergency powers to cut electricity permanently. The timing was calculated. Monday evening was exactly when I'd be across town, handling an emergency electrical repair at the VA hospital that I couldn't reschedule. She'd also brought in reinforcements. The meeting notice mentioned a qualified building inspector and residential health specialist who would provide expert testimony about medical equipment dangers. Karen was assembling what looked like an official tribunal to railroad my family out of the neighborhood. But her biggest miscalculation was underestimating my preparation timeline. The generator truck was scheduled to arrive Tuesday morning, perfectly positioned to make her Monday evening ultimatum look like a joke. Sunday night, I made final preparations while listening to Karen's increasingly frantic voicemails, demanding that I acknowledge receipt of emergency compliance requirements. Her voice carried a hysteria that told me she knew her time was running out. The coalition was ready. Mrs. Patterson had organized medical equipment documentation from 6 families, proving that Karen's health hazard claims were fabricated nonsense. Mr. Kowalski had compiled a video highlight reel of Karen's trespassing and harassment, synchronized with audio recordings of her conspiracy planning. Mrs. Garcia had driven up from Sunset Meadows with 3 other families Karen had previously victimized, all carrying court documents proving her pattern of disability fraud. Monday evening, I watched from my security cameras as Karen arrived early to set up her ambush. She'd brought folding tables, printed presentations, and enough official-looking documents to stock a government office. The building inspector and health specialist were clearly coached performers, probably friends she'd convinced to play expert roles. 23 neighbors attended, the largest HOA meeting in our community's history. But as Karen began her presentation about medical facility violations requiring immediate intervention, something beautiful happened. Mrs. Patterson stood up first. "Karen, I'm a registered nurse with 30 years of experience. Home oxygen equipment is specifically designed for residential use. Your claims about safety hazards are medically false." Mr. Kowalski followed. "I have security footage of you trespassing on 6 properties to photograph medical equipment. You've been stalking disabled residents." Then Mrs. Garcia delivered the killing blow. This woman was convicted of identical harassment in her previous neighborhood. Federal court ruled she engaged in systematic discrimination against disabled residents. She owes our families $47,000 in unpaid court judgments. The room erupted. Karen's expert witnesses started backing toward the exit as neighbors demanded answers about her criminal history. Her carefully orchestrated tribunal was becoming a public trial of her own predatory behavior. But Karen's desperation drove her to one final fatal mistake. When she realized the meeting was spiraling beyond her control, she grabbed her keys and headed for the door, muttering something about taking care of this problem permanently. Mr. Kowalski's security footage later showed Karen approaching the utility shed at 10:47 p.m. with bolt cutters, clearly planning to repeat her previous sabotage attempt. But this time, she found something that stopped her cold. A 53-foot generator truck was already parked directly in front of the utility access, blocking her path with 50,000 pounds of hospital-grade diesel power. The massive Caterpillar engine idled with the low rumble of industrial authority, emergency strobe lights painting the entire street in alternating red and blue. The mini twist that destroyed her final play. I'd moved up the generator delivery by 12 hours, anticipating her desperation move. While she was conducting her fake tribunal, industrial-grade medical protection was already being deployed to neutralize her utility sabotage strategy. Security cameras captured Karen standing helpless before the mechanical giant, realizing that her power over utilities had been completely nullified by superior technology. She tried calling the city to demand the truck's removal, but emergency medical equipment has federal protection that trumps every local ordinance. The psychological impact was perfect. That generator truck dominated the narrow residential street like an occupying army. Its diesel soundtrack replaced her quiet suburban paradise with industrial reality. Emergency lighting turned night into day, visible from every house in the neighborhood. But the most beautiful detail was the truck's positioning. Parked legally on public streets, it blocked access not just to the utility shed, but to Karen's own driveway. She couldn't get her car out without asking the generator technician, who was under federal medical equipment protection orders, to move his truck. Karen had tried to weaponize utilities against a disabled veteran, Now she was trapped in her own house by industrial equipment that was federally protected and legally untouchable. While she stood in her driveway, staring up at the mechanical monster that had destroyed her suburban tyranny, I was already planning the final phase that would end her predatory career permanently. Tuesday morning at 8 a.m., our quiet suburban street looked like a disaster movie set. The 53-foot generator truck dominated the narrow road like a diesel-powered skyscraper, its emergency strobe lights painting beige houses in dramatic reds and blues. The Caterpillar engine created a thunderous industrial soundtrack that could be heard 3 blocks away. Karen emerged from her house in a designer bathrobe, her perfect bob haircut disheveled from a sleepless night of listening to 50 kilowatts of mechanical justice rumbling outside her bedroom window. She stood dwarfed by the towering truck, looking like a suburban dictator who just discovered her kingdom had been invaded by federal authority. "This is destroying our neighborhood," she screamed at the generator technician, a grizzled guy named Dave, who'd been installing hospital emergency power for 20 years. "I demand you remove this industrial equipment immediately." Dave looked up from his control panel, took a long sip of coffee, and delivered the most beautiful response I'd ever heard. "Ma'am, this is federally protected medical emergency infrastructure. I can't move it any more than I could relocate someone's wheelchair." The HOA meeting had been relocated to the street because the generator noise made the community center unusable. 28 residents gathered around the truck in a bizarre suburban town hall, with Karen standing on a folding chair trying to shout over the diesel engine. "This man is destroying our property values with industrial equipment," she yelled, pointing at me like I was a war criminal. "He's turned our residential neighborhood into a construction zone." That's when I produced the HUD civil rights complaint, case number clearly visible on federal letterhead. "Actually, Karen, you triggered federal medical equipment protections when you cut power to a dying veteran's life support. This generator ensures that never happens again." The blood drained from her face as I read the charges aloud. Pattern of disability discrimination, conspiracy to endanger life support equipment, violation of federal medical access easements. The words carried over the generator's rumble, reaching every neighbor who'd gathered to witness her downfall. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward with documentation that shredded Karen's remaining credibility. "I spoke with respiratory therapists at 3 hospitals. Home oxygen equipment poses 0 safety risks. Karen's medical hazard claims are completely fabricated." Mr. Kowalski connected his laptop to portable speakers, playing audio of Karen's conspiracy planning over the industrial soundtrack. "Make sure the power cut looks accidental. We can't have documentation of intentional medical equipment sabotage." But the moment that destroyed her came when Mrs. Garcia stood before the crowd with a folder of court documents. This woman was convicted of identical harassment in Sunset Meadows. Federal court ordered her to pay $75,000 in damages to families she drove out through disability discrimination. She's a professional predator who targets elderly residents. Karen's meltdown was spectacular. She demanded the generator truck leave her neighborhood, claimed federal investigators had no jurisdiction over HOA matters, and threatened to sue me for destroying property values with industrial noise pollution. A Channel 12 news crew had arrived, drawn by neighbor tips about HOA president versus medical equipment. Reporter Jennifer Martinez asked the question that finished Karen permanently. "Ma'am, did you cut power to a dying veteran's medical equipment over landscaping violations?" "Medical emergencies belong in hospitals, not residential neighborhoods," Karen shrieked, her composure completely shattered. "These people are running illegal medical facilities and destroying our community character." The crowd's reaction was immediate and devastating. Neighbors who'd remained neutral throughout the conflict started openly calling for Karen's resignation. Even her few remaining board supporters backed away as she continued ranting about medical equipment invasions and property value terrorism. That's when the FBI agent arrived. Agent Sarah Sterling walked calmly through the crowd, her credentials immediately silencing Karen's tirade. "Miss Pemberton, I'm here about your federal civil rights violation. You cannot approach any residents' utility connections, contact families with medical equipment, or interfere with federally protected emergency infrastructure." The visual was perfect for news cameras. Tiny suburban tyrant arguing with federal authority while a massive diesel generator rumbled behind her. its emergency lights creating a dramatic backdrop for her public humiliation. "This is harassment," Karen protested. "I'm the HOA president. I have authority over community standards." Agent Sterling's response was delivered with professional calm that made it even more devastating. "Ma'am, federal law supersedes HOA authority when it comes to disability rights. Violation of this restraining order results in immediate federal arrest." As Karen stood speechless before FBI credentials, the generator truck demonstration reached its crescendo. Dave fired up the full system, powering every house on the block with industrial-grade electricity that made our streetlights blaze like stadium illumination. The psychological impact was overwhelming. 50,000 watts of federal protection drowning out Karen's protests, emergency lighting turning our suburban street into primetime television, and FBI authority reducing her HOA power to irrelevant noise. Karen's reign of terror had ended, not with legal paperwork or board votes, but with industrial equipment and federal badges, proving that some fights you simply cannot win. Karen Pemberton resigned as HOA president via her lawyer's letter the next morning. The email was brief, professional, and tinged with the desperation of someone who just discovered that federal law trumps suburban tyranny every single time. By Friday, the FBI investigation had expanded to include Pinnacle Properties and their Community Demographic Transition Scheme. Federal agents seized Karen's financial records, revealing $23,000 in referral fees from elderly families harassed out of their homes. 3 other HOA communities reported similar patterns, turning Karen's local harassment into a federal racketeering investigation. The board members who'd supported Karen's property standards initiative resigned en masse, leaving the neighborhood to hold emergency elections. I was elected HOA president unanimously, running on a platform of medical equipment protection and common sense governance. My first official act was amending our community covenant to include permanent medical rights protections. No future board could restrict oxygen concentrators, wheelchairs, dialysis equipment, or any other life-sustaining devices. The Medical Rights Protection Amendment passed 46-1, with Karen's house mysteriously vacant during the vote. The HUD civil rights settlement brought $75,000 in compensation to affected families, funded by Karen's house sale and Pinnacle Properties legal settlement. Mrs. Patterson used her portion to install a wheelchair-accessible community garden, where Karen's oversized lawn used to spread. Mr. Kowalski upgraded his security system and started a neighborhood watch program focused on protecting vulnerable residents. The generator truck became neighborhood legend. Photos of that massive diesel monster dwarfing Karen's suburban paradise went viral on social media, inspiring copycat stories from disabled veterans across the country. Dave, the generator technician, still stops by occasionally, just to make sure Ezra's equipment stays protected. My grandfather's health improved dramatically once the stress of Karen's harassment ended. The VA hospital, inspired by our backup power solution, installed emergency generator systems for 20 homebound veterans facing similar HOA harassment. Ezra now volunteers as an advocate, helping other military families navigate disability discrimination battles. The social good that emerged from our victory exceeded anything I'd imagined. Settlement money funded the Veteran Medical Equipment Protection Fund, providing backup power systems and legal support for disabled veterans facing HOA harassment. My electrical company donates installation services, and the program has expanded to 12 states. I discovered a passion for disability rights advocacy that surprised everyone, including myself. Enrolled in paralegal courses specializing in federal housing law, I now consult for veteran families facing HOA discrimination. The technical knowledge I gained fighting Karen has helped dozens of families protect their medical equipment from predatory board members. 3 military families moved to Willowbrook Heights specifically for our medical accommodation protections. Property values actually increased due to our reputation as a veteran-friendly community. The house Karen abandoned was purchased by the Martinez family. Their disabled son requires the same type of oxygen support that Karen had tried to ban. Our annual Medical Equipment Appreciation Day celebration honors the victory over petty tyranny while educating residents about disability rights. Last year, 150 people attended, including Mrs. Garcia and other Sunset Meadows survivors who finally collected their court-ordered damages from Karen's asset forfeiture. The technical knowledge that saved my family is now shared freely online. My HOA Rights Toolkit teaches federal disability law, easement research, and documentation strategies to families facing medical equipment discrimination. Download numbers exceeded 50,000 in the first year, with success stories from coast to coast. Karen's name became neighborhood shorthand for any petty tyrant who thinks rules trump basic humanity. "Don't go all Karen Pemberton on me" is now local slang for bureaucratic overreach. Her foreclosed house serves as a permanent reminder that some battles you simply cannot win. The generator truck story spread through veteran networks nationwide, inspiring federal policy changes. HUD now investigates medical equipment harassment more aggressively, and several states have passed veterans' medical rights legislation, specifically protecting military families from HOA discrimination. As I write this, my grandfather is napping peacefully in his chair, oxygen concentrator humming quietly beside him. The sound that once triggered Karen's harassment campaign now represents victory over suburban tyranny and federal protection for the vulnerable.